La Escuela de Humanidades y Educación del Tecnológico de Monterrey en Campus Puebla les da la más cordial bienvenida a su podcast Atrévete a Saber, el nuevo espacio de divulgación del trabajo de investigación realizado por parte de los profesores de la Escuela de Humanidades y Educación. Les saludamos sus anfitriones, Rodrigo Esparza,
Connie Castillo
y Andrés Barradas.
Bienvenidos y comenzamos. Atrévete a Saber es un espacio de divulgación del conocimiento generado por nuestros colegas dentro de la EGE como parte de su labor investigativa. El saber no solo nos permite conocer el mundo, sino también generar una reflexión crítica sobre este y sobre las diversas aristas de la dimensión simbólica del humano. Demos, pues, al conocimiento ese cariz de atrevimiento, de aventura para ir más allá de lo inmediato y evidente y construir una nueva forma de concebir la realidad que permita dar nuestra ilusión humana de plenitud existencial.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Dare to Know. It's a great honor to us to receive this time Professor Raj Sisodia, who is a FEMSA Distinguished University Professor in Conscious Enterprise. He is a professor in a business school and IGADE Business School, a thought leader of the conscious capitalism movement. Raj Sisodia is co-founder and chairman of Conscious Capitalism Inc. He was previous F.W. Olin Distinguished Professor of Global Business and Whole Foods Market Research Scholar in Conscious Capitalism at Babson College and trustee, Professor of Marketing and the founding director of the Center for Marketing Technology at Bentley University. Raj was born in India and spent part of his childhood in Barbados, California, and Canada. He was educated as an electrical engineer for the Birla Institute of Technology and Science. He received an MBA in marketing from Hamlal Bajaj Institute of Management Studies in Mumbai. Later, he earned a PhD in business from Columbia University. Raj has published 11 books and over 100 academic articles. He has consulted with a thought executive program for numerous companies, including AT&T, Nokia, LG, Kraft Foods, Whole Foods, Tata, Siemens, Sprint, Volvo, IBM, etc. He is one of the board of directors at the Container Store and a trustee of Conscious Capitalism Inc. Dr. Raj Sisodia joined Tecnológico Monterrey as FEMSA Distinguished University Professor of Conscious Enterprise and Chairman of the Conscious Enterprise Center. Welcome, Professor Raj, and thank you for joining us today.
You are welcome. It's my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you. This is a broadcast in which we try to expand, to communicate the knowledge that our colleagues get from their own research. So we would like to make some questions to start. There's a question that always we ask to our visitors. The first question is, why should we dare to know?
Well, if the question is why should we try to understand things in the world that affect our lives,
Yes.
I think that is an important element. Of course, there's so much knowledge and there's so many disciplines and fields. It is impossible for us to know about all of it or go in depth on most of those things. But I do think that the economy and business and capitalism are the things that affect all of us. And therefore, even if we are not directly involved in that through our work and our lives, I think it's still important to know how that works and how that system functions and how it can function better, like any system, I think. There's always great room for improvement. And that's definitely true in business and capitalism, which is why we have created this movement called conscious capitalism.
Okay, thank you. Uh, about precisely about conscious, what does mean the conscious? What would you say or share with us about the conscious?
Yes, so consciousness is about being awakened, being mindful, about seeing the whole picture, understanding reality as it is, seeing the consequences of our actions in the short term and in the long term, and expanding the scope of our awareness, right? Because we can do anything with low level of consciousness, which is simply looking at my immediate surroundings and my immediate situation, right? And I'm just looking to make a decision about something. But I'm not looking at the consequences on other people or in the long term or even on myself, etc. I'm just trying to get some kind of an outcome. It's like if I'm sitting in the dark and I light a match, I can only see this much, area illuminated. But if I put on a light, I can see more. If I put on a bigger light, I can see more and more and more. And I think consciousness is that light that allows us to see the bigger picture. And once we see the bigger picture and we understand the consequences of our actions on ourselves, on others, in the short term and in the long term, then we have a deeper sense of responsibility and accountability for all of those consequences of our actions. We don't just see the ones that we want to see, right? But we see all of the consequences. And then we start to say whether this is the right thing to do or the right way to do something.
Okay, having in mind those that you shared us about consciousness, would you say that there is an internal contradiction in the notion of conscious capitalism?
I do not believe so because anything can be done with higher consciousness. So when we say conscious capitalism, we don't mean that the traditional capitalism is unconscious. We just mean that it is operating at a lower level of consciousness. So this is more accurately described as higher consciousness capitalism. So the lower level of consciousness is about self, it is about survival, it is about short term, immediate, right? And I think traditionally capitalism has been practiced in many ways with those blinders, I would say, with the narrow perspective that business is only about making money. And therefore, the objective of any business is to make as much money as possible. And for that, we use people and we use natural resources and financial resources. But really, the low consciousness way of thinking is to say all of that is being done just to create as much profit for the owner as possible. And we are recognizing that business is a much deeper and richer and more important activity that has many, many consequences on all of our lives, whether we are a customer, or an employee, or a community member, or a supplier, or just a citizen. Business impact. The way business is conducted impacts our lives in so many ways. And so we want to broaden the way we think about business, to think about all of the consequences, and also to think about why do we go into business? It is not just to make money. I mean, the most important reason to go into a business is because you want to improve the lives of people. That is why we should go into business. And many great businesses are created with that motivation, right? There's a higher purpose. Money is necessary for a business to survive and to succeed, but that should not be the purpose. The purpose should be to do something that is needed, to solve a problem that exists, in society or for the planet, and find a way to do that while making a profit. Because if you're able to find a profit model around that, then that becomes scalable and sustainable over time, right? Because otherwise you have to rely on subsidies and donations and so forth. But a business has the ability to generate value for everybody: customers, employees, investors, communities, suppliers, the planet. Create positive value for everybody, right? And keep growing and doing more of that over time if you do it in a sustainable way.
Perhaps maybe there's a lot of people that have a traditional notion about capitalism. For instance, uh, I would say that capitalism is based on private ownership and explosion of human and natural resources. In that sense, I would make this almost the same question. how can we talk about conscious capitalism if we exploit natural and human resources?
Yes, well, the language matters, right? So when we use the word exploit, that implies that we're doing something abusive, right? Uh, it doesn't have to be that way. See, and I don't think it usually is. Business in a free market society, in a democratic society, a business can exist only if it satisfies all of its stakeholders. So you are not forced to take a job at any company, right? They offer you a certain salary, a certain kind of working environment and conditions, certain level of purpose and meaning in that work, etc. And you have the ability to choose whether you want to work there or not, right? So businesses can only offer voluntary exchange. A government can force you to do something. Businesses cannot force you to do anything. They cannot force you to buy your computer or everything around you. They cannot force you to work at a particular company. They cannot force you to invest, etc. Right? And so there has to be a benefit for doing so, right? You have to decide that yes, it makes sense for me to buy this product, or it makes sense for me to work at this company or invest in this company. So in that sense, there's a built-in mechanism. The fact that business is based on voluntary exchange makes it fundamentally, I believe, ethical because if you are trading in a legal commodity, so I'm not talking about drug dealers, for example, right? Obviously, but if you are buying and selling or manufacturing and selling something that is legal to somebody who wants to buy it, then yes, that is a voluntary exchange that makes them better off. So I don't believe there's exploitation in that unless there's a monopoly, right? If a business captures 100% of the market and people don't have a choice, or if in a particular part of the country there's no jobs, other jobs available, etc. There are situations, certainly, where businesses can operate in that way. But overall, I think the biggest factor to me in traditional capitalism is really this idea that we have allowed businesses to externalize their costs onto society, right? So the environmental damage that they do, the pollution that is released into the atmosphere, or the rivers that are polluted, or the natural resources that are non-renewable that are taken out. We don't require companies to really put a price on that, right? In other words, there's a cost. There's a cost that is associated with the kind of damage that is done, and we allow them to do that. I think that's wrong. Businesses should not be allowed to put any cost onto society or onto people, onto the future. That is a big part of what conscious capitalism also advocates. Because otherwise, we have a business that makes money, but then has a negative impact on people's health. We are selling them junk food, getting them obese, or it has a negative impact on the environment, on communities, etc. All of that has to be factored in, the true cost of doing business.
Yes, indeed, that's a thing that I would like to rescue because in your article you mentioned that poverty has decreased through the last 200 years.
What has increased? Prosperity, right?
Decrease, the poverty, decrease.
Has decreased. That's right. Dramatically.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Um, but what has been the price we had to pay? Pollution, overexploitation once again, and we have a serious global warming conditions.
Yes.
So what are the pros and cons when we put to the
Yeah. So
balance?
I think the way that we have achieved our prosperity has in fact created many problems. As you point out, we have deforested the planet to a large degree. That's caused desertification, right? We have um, created a lot of air pollution, certainly the carbon that has gone into the air. Um, we have also created, I think part of it is the aggressive marketing of products, especially products that are not good for us. We get addicted to sugar, salt, and fat, and so junk food and sugary drinks and so forth. There's aggressive marketing of those things to children and to other vulnerable populations, but even adults. That has created a crisis of obesity and diabetes and all of those kinds of things, right? So again, when the lower consciousness, when you operate, then you feel that it's fine. Doesn't matter if I have my product is bad for people. As long as I can get them to buy it, I should sell it. That's why we need higher consciousness to say that what we sell you is going to be good for your health. It's good for your well-being, right? And that's why the consciousness needs to come. It's not just about treating customers as customers, but treating them as stakeholders, which means that their well-being matters. The well-being of employees matters when you treat them as stakeholders, right? And therefore we start to think about it in a much deeper, richer way. That what we want to do is to create businesses that actually have all of the positive impacts that we have seen. So not only, capitalism is not just about exploiting resources and all of that. It's also about extraordinary amounts of innovation, right? So if you look at the computer that we are both using right now, and the cameras and the sound system and everything, right? The phones that we use, all of the pharmaceutical and medical advances. I mean, these are all the fruits of capitalism. So capitalism also harnesses human ingenuity in a much more dramatic and effective way than any other system has been able to do, right? So we create all of this progress in the world as well. And yeah, some of it has resulted in damage to the environment, but not all of it, right? And I think what we need to do now, as we have become more conscious, see, we lived at a time 100, 200, 300 years ago when the earth felt like it was infinitely large and there was no limit. I remember oil was only really discovered like 140 years ago, right? Before that, we weren't even using oil in human history. And when we started to find it, it's like, oh my God, there's so much. So we didn't know and we didn't realize about the impact of the carbon and so forth. And even if we did realize, which we did 40, 50 years ago, the governments did not move fast enough to make companies accountable for that. So I think all of that is in the past, but I think what we have to do in the future is do everything with the higher consciousness and full accountability and responsibility for all of the consequences of our products and the way we make them. And we want to have a positive impact on our employees, on our customers, on our suppliers, on our communities, on the environment, right? And all of them, while we're also generating good returns on the investments that are made. See, corporate profits are important. If businesses don't make money, free market societies don't function because governments don't create wealth. Government can only tax the wealth generated through business, right? Directly the profit of the business, but also all the jobs that the business creates, and then the income tax, etc. So all that funding for public services, for roads and highways and airports and public schools and all of that comes from having a healthy business sector. And I'm talking about free market systems like Mexico and the US and Western Europe, right? Then you have that other model, which was tried, socialism, communism, government ownership of all the means of production, the Marxist idea. That does not work. That does not work for anybody. There's no innovation. The government has too much power. You become like slaves in that system. You take away the scope for human innovation and creativity and ingenuity. Everybody just becomes, like everybody else. Human beings are unique and different. Each of us should be allowed to develop our gift. So that system doesn't work. It doesn't mean that this system is perfect, but we can make it much better by bringing in consciousness.
In order to continue with this notion of capitalism and conscious capitalism, for how long the natural conditions of the earth do you think are going to be sustainable? Because we produce, we extract, we throw some those things that we use, but finally the earth has its own capability.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we now have to start operating within the parameters of the Earth's boundaries, right? And there's a lot of work being done on that. There's something called the donut economy, which looks at that. There's the Sustainable Development Goals, etc. I think the answer to that is going to be innovation. So, for example, if you just look at energy, right? Today it's coal, it's petroleum, it's natural gas, right, and some nuclear, and now we're getting the wind and the solar. But if you look at the rates of growth of which of those are growing faster, it's really the renewable, right? The non-polluting, the wind and the solar and geothermal and And even nuclear, there's a way to do nuclear that is with much lower risk and not having the environmental consequences. So I think innovation is going to drive us towards a future in which we can still meet our needs, our energy needs, for example, which is what we're talking about here, without causing damage to the environment, right, or to the planet. So that's one sector. But likewise, we have to innovate like that in how we produce our food and what we are doing to our soil, right? That we are destroying the soil because of all of the chemical fertilizers that we put into it and the monocrop kind of a way of farming that we have. So we have to reform in all of those areas, the way we produce clothes, way we dispose of things. We have to create a circular economy so that the product is from the birth until it is fully recycled. We don't throw things into the landfill, into the oceans, we don't, none of that. So that is all about the conscious. Now that we are conscious that we are living on a finite planet, which has limited resources and cannot absorb all the pollution that we're generating. I think now the locus of innovation moves towards that and is moving towards that, right? How can we create long-term viability, sustainability, so that we can actually keep thriving forever on this planet? And I do believe that those answers already exist in many cases, like in energy. And the answers exist in somebody's mind, who's already alive, and we have to tap into that. But the best way that we know how to do that is through these conscious businesses that operate with that higher purpose, with a clear sense of values, when they are fully accountable to society. They care about the others, not just the planet, but other species. We are destroying other species, right? We're killing 10 billion animals a year to feed ourselves. And that has huge consequences, but we're also destroying other wild species. Most animals on this planet now are in factory farms, not in the jungles. So those are all things that, again, requires of us to wake up, before we destroy ourselves and destroy this planet and destroy other forms of life. And that is really why we talk about consciousness. I think the only pathway forward is higher consciousness for business, but for education, for government, for every field, for healthcare. We just need higher consciousness. What are we doing in healthcare? It's insane. The US, for example, where I live, spends $4 trillion a year on healthcare, 2 times more per capita than any other country in the world, and yet our public health outcomes are worse. Obesity is much higher. Diseases are much more prevalent. Many average Americans are on 6 different medications. And now with these new medicines for reducing weight, even they're putting children on these medications. I mean, it's all craziness. We're not looking at what really creates health. We are really figuring out how to find a profit by treating disease and making sure people have as many conditions. That's what happens. So one of the distortions, I think, of free market capitalism has been treating every industry like it's the same. And I think healthcare is one of those industries that is different. And it's not about maximizing how many tablets you can sell. It's about making sure that people are healthy. And then if they need some medicine, we have it. But we have created a system in which we're trying to get as many people addicted and hooked on these medications for the rest of their life, because that's how we measure success. So I think there are some needed changes. How do you define success? And as I said, some industries that are unique, that we have to look at them in a different way, healthcare being one of them.
Okay. Why do you think now is more important than ever to build conscious leaders?
Well, without leadership, nothing happens. And the consciousness of the leader really determines the consciousness of the organization. So if the leader is a low consciousness human being who only cares about themselves, right, is selfish and wants only about their own power and ego and money, right, then that consciousness is going to be part of the organization if they're the CEO of that organization, right? But we have to find leaders and elevate the consciousness of leaders so that they're thinking at this higher level, right? So we have to awaken leaders, wake up and see the reality, right? Don't just think of your life in this narrow way, because you're going to end up dying maybe with a lot of money and power, but you'll be miserable and you will leave no positive legacy. And people will be glad that you died, if you have that kind of leader. And so we have to awaken leaders, and we have to create a condition in which we appoint conscious leaders to head up companies, and elect conscious leaders to head up governments. I think that is a fundamental requirement. So being conscious means that you are thinking beyond yourself, you're thinking long term, you're thinking about the well-being of everybody, right? You're operating with love and with strength. So, you're strong and you're coming from a place of love. We talk about that a lot. Conscious businesses are built on love. Everything that we do in life should be an expression of our love. Business can be an expression of our love. This is how we take care of each other. In a free market society, government doesn't provide for our needs. Businesses are given that opportunity. Can we do that with genuine care? And if we do that, not only for our employees, but our customers, everybody, then we'll create a world in which we can all flourish, and prosper together without causing that kind of suffering in the world. And I think that all takes very high consciousness. What I've realized about business education, which is why many people criticize business, it's all about the head and the wallet, right? It's all about the numbers and all about the money. And I realized in my business MBA and PhD education, I was never once connected in my heart, and I was never once inspired. So the heart and the spirit were missing from business education. And we need to have that. We need to bring in the heart, the love, and we need to be inspired by what we're doing in business. And those are the elements that I think conscious capitalism provides. These are businesses built on love and care and a higher purpose. That's right. That's the heart and the spirit right there. And that is possible for every business. And the great irony is that businesses that operate this way are actually more successful in financial terms by far, but they're not doing it at the expense of people's well-being or customers' health or communities thriving or the environment flourishing. They are doing it simultaneously while they're creating those positive impacts as well. That's the whole idea of it, right? It's not about win-lose. It's everybody has to win in that, right? So everybody matters and everybody wins. That is the underlying philosophy here.
What would you say is the role of philosophy in a position of conscious capitalism?
What is the role of philosophy, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think philosophy is very important because how we think about things determines what we do in the world. So if you don't have an underlying philosophy, then everything just becomes about, utilitarianism, right? I'll just do whatever I need to do in order to get what I want, as opposed to having a philosophy and a theory of how business plays a role in society and in the world and in our lives, and what role that should be, and how we can get the most positive impacts from that without suffering the negative consequences. I believe that we are very accustomed to thinking in trade-offs, right? That if I do this, then if I have a positive impact here, I have to have a negative impact somewhere else. I don't think that is true. I think we can have a positive impact everywhere, but we have to come up with the models and the way of thinking that allows that to happen. And we have to engage human creativity. When we put constraints that say that, yeah, we cannot pollute, we cannot add to the carbon, we cannot do this, and we still need to make these products and serve customer needs. How do we do it? That's when innovation happens. That's when human creativity gets tapped into. And it's one thing we realized about human beings: there is no limit to our creativity. We have not discovered the upper limits of human ingenuity and human creativity. So many things you look around, they are like miracles. Some human being came up with that, right? And so, but that doesn't happen automatically. That only happens when somebody is inspired, when somebody is given the freedom, somebody is given the tools, right? And then human beings can create. So when we have the constraints, and what we're doing now in the future, we're putting more constraints. We're saying, yes, we want transportation, but we cannot have traffic jams or we cannot have air pollution, right? So how do we do that? Well, Uber and those kinds of innovations came out of thinking along those lines, right? That we can simultaneously achieve things that we thought were trade-offs. So it's breaking that trade-off mentality. So again, I think they're all philosophical underpinnings to these things. What is your model of life? What is your mental model about how you think life works? How you think the economy works? you know. And if you have a bad mental model, then you're going to do bad things. But if you have a good way of thinking about it, then you're going to actually have a positive impact. So I do believe that we should spend more time in business education, talking about that. When I came to Columbia University in 1981 for my PhD, at that time they had a required MBA course called the Conceptual Foundations of Business. Conceptual Foundations of Business. And that was kind of a philosophy of business course. Over time, I'm sad to see they've taken that away. Now they only have accounting and finance, and they just go directly into the nuts and bolts of business. But I think we have to spend more time on the underlying philosophical underpinnings and our theoretical understanding. And I think this is where we made a big mistake, or we got trapped in this paradigm. The whole foundation of capitalism is based upon economics, and economics is based upon this view of Homo economicus, as it is called, that human beings are only defined by their behavior as rational self-interest maximizers, that they're individualistic, that they are selfish, and they are short-term oriented in their thinking, and that's how they make decisions. I think that is a very narrow understanding of human beings. Human beings are also altruistic. We are loving, and we are cooperative with each other. That's why Homo sapiens have succeeded the way we have, right? Not just because we are individualistic and selfish, but because we are cooperative and altruistic. And our economic systems do not take that into account adequately, right? And therefore, our whole Western laissez-faire capitalism is all about everybody pursuing their own individual self-interest to the maximum. They somehow think that will create the ideal society. Well, it doesn't. You have to simultaneously look at what's good for the individual, what's good for the group, what's good for the company, what's good for the country, and what's good for the planet. We have to think all of those dimensions at the same time. Right? Now, what happens? Capitalism only thinks about the bottom one, what's good for me, and communism only thinks about what's good for the country or collective, right? But that leaves out the other layers. I think we can do all of them. That's really where we need to go.
Thanks for the last question. Is what would you say to those young people, to those young students who wants to entrepreneur?
Who wants to be an entrepreneur?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful thing to be an entrepreneur. But I would say, why do you want to be an entrepreneur? What is your root motivation? And if the motivation is that I want to make as much money as possible, then I would say that's the wrong motivation. I would ask them to find what inspires them and what kind of problem they want to solve in the world. And for that, I have two lenses. So I ask them, what breaks your heart? What do you see in society that is missing, that causes you pain? Right? And then on the other side, what brings you great joy when you do something for somebody, or whatever dimension it might be, right? So look for what breaks your heart, what brings you great joy. Somewhere in there is where you should focus your purpose of your life, and therefore your business. Your business should be a reflection of the purpose of your life. And the purpose of your life should not be about money. It should be about making a difference in the world. As we say, the default human purpose is to grow and to give. How are you going to grow and how are you going to give? That's for each individual to figure out. But give means have a positive impact on others. So view the business not as a way to make a lot of money, but as a way to make a big difference in the world and solve real problems. And when I say problems, that really means reduce suffering, because those problems are causing some suffering in the world, right? So how can we think about entrepreneurship in those terms? That would be a conscious entrepreneur. That is a business that is born conscious from day one, because it has a higher purpose that is about reducing suffering and bringing more joy into the world. And if we can do all of our entrepreneurial initiatives in that way, then we will solve all the problems one by one that exist out there. Right now, what happens, we create a new business to make money, but then we end up creating more problems. Pollution for people, for society. And then we have all the nonprofits that come to clean up the problems that are being created by businesses. And we should not create the problem.
So you are convinced that it's possible to align business with ethics?
Oh, absolutely. And that's the only way to do business. You know, ethics is a fundamental that has to be the foundation. But it doesn't just stop there. Because sometimes for people, ethical means I don't break the laws, you know, I don't do anything, but you're still having negative impact. Very often the laws have not caught up with what is right, what is wrong, right? So it's not just, it's a higher level of ethical behavior. It's really having a moral compass within you. It's not just about what are the laws in this country, what can I do, what can I get away with. So yeah, having a higher standard for yourself on what is, well, not only what is acceptable, but what is legally allowed, but what is morally and ethically right to do.
Okay, thank you very much. Professor Raj, it has been a great pleasure having this conversation with you. Thank you very much for accepting and receive us.
No problem. It was a pleasure to speak with you, Rodrigo. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Have a great evening.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Muchas gracias por su generosa atención y nos encontramos en nuestra próxima emisión de su podcast Atrévete a Saber. ¿Y tú, te atreves?